everyone. For this video, I will be reviewing what I learned as I completed the module on Teachers Agents of Change. In this assignment, I looked into the complex role that I play as a teacher, the importance of partnerships between the school, family, and community, and how those partnerships affect change. This module is part of a series that focus on developing mindsets and dispositions in order to implement culturally responsive teaching practices. So in my presentation in my presentation today, I'm going to focus on how we as teachers can enact culturally responsive pedagogy in terms of content, methods, and relationships. And then I'll expand a little bit about each section with examples from the module. But before I get started, I wanted to start by reflecting on some of the statistics that were shared at the beginning of the module when it came to racial and ethnic disparities. Um, the one that stood out to me the most was there was a 21 to 26 point gap between white and Hispanic students when it came to math and reading scores, and there was a 26 to 31 point gap between white and black students. And this right there was a very large disparity that I have seen in some of the data at my own school site, even though we have been working to try to close that gap. And it's really frustrating when you're trying to you think you're making meaningful change, but then you still see the data doesn't back up the change that you think you see within inside the classroom. Another one that really hit me was that Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than their white students at the same school, and that was another statistic that really hit close to home because it's something that I've noticed when in my role as the data analysis for my school for PBIS. So uh, I look at any type of suspensions or referrals and citations. And then we use that data to drive decision making for what changes that are going to be in place. And even as we're making changes and that gap has closed, there's still a gap, and that is cause for concern. So, I'm first going to kind of cover what I learned through this module. I didn't learn anything really new. But is probably because I've actually covered SEL a lot in PDs through my district and through my school site. I've had about 16, I think, full day pullout sessions when it comes to PBIS, which is part of PBIS is how to be culturally responsive and and kind of infuse a positive overall interactions and atmosphere within the school. And we have all of our behavioral intervention systems are supposed to be positive based when it comes to any interventions we give at school. So there's been a lot of pull-out days that I've had when it comes to anything kind of in the SEL realm. Um, but I did really enjoy the module. I felt like it was a great review of information I already knew. So the three main key takeaways that I want to take address during this video is uh, how we as teachers can be agents of change in our classroom and how we're going to do this. So the three areas that we're really going to be able to do this are content, methods, and relationships. So content is what we teach as teachers. The methods are how we teach that content, and the relationships are the connections that we have with our students, their families, and the community as a whole. So, first, I'm going to go over content in order to be culturally responsive with our students. As teachers, we need to choose content based on what is relevant for our students and content that disrupts stereotypes and biases. So, how can we do that? Well, we can ask questions to find out what our students are interested in. We can ask students our questions to what concerns do they have? what's going on in society has really affected a lot of our students, and that might be a concern. So we might be able to connect lessons to what is happening in the world around us. I found it very interesting in the case studies that Silvio actually found it easier to make those connections to the content if he already knew what those interests were or what things concern them. And Autumn made the same connection in her case study where she found that because students liked wrestling, that she was able to use their love of wrestling to connect to adjectives, and that way students really had a feel of what an adjective was at that point, and they were able to use that for a character study later on. But she took the content from her lesson and she supplemented it with extra things that the students were interested in. Now, usually your school's administration or the district's going to pick your curriculum. So, unfortunately, there's going to be very few times that we can actually choose the content we teach, but it does happen sometimes. For example, I just applied and was accepted for a committee that's going to work this summer on choosing a new science curriculum. We're going to narrow down the curriculum out of 8 curriculums to 2 that we're going to pilot next year. And then we're going to come back at the end of the year after we've taught both for about a half year and decide which was the best science program to implement later on. It would be the 2021 year will be pilot year, and then 21 through 22 will be our implementation year. But most of the time, what you're going to do is you're going to have to supplement to the curriculum with additional resources to kind of get your students engaged. You're normally not going to have the ability to choose the curriculum that you want. You're just going to have to find supplemental materials to connect the material to the lesson content. It's now time to move on to methods. So, to use culturally responsive methods in our classroom, there's a couple different ways we can do that. We can involve our students in the construction of knowledge. The example that the module gave was a teacher teaching a math problem and asking them different ways to solve it, and then coming together and deciding which way is the most effective. I do something like this at the beginning of each math lesson where students are shown a picture or a problem and are asked to solve it on a whiteboard, and they're then sharing their thinking with their peers, and this gives a chance for the students to one, work on it on their own, and then share their thinking and how they did each step and why they think it's the best way with their class members. What I really like about this is it's very student centered, and students really are working on that academic vocabulary and they're engaging with each other. Another way is we can build on students' background knowledge and strengths. So I know that a lot of us remember from a previous class that when we're lesson planning, one of the things we need to do is think of ways to connect the students' background knowledge to the assignments at the beginning or during a lesson. We can also engage students in problem posing and critical inquiry. So one of the examples that was given in the module was a teacher using a writing practice to by posing a for them to write about a problem within their school or community, and then trying to propose a solution. That right there allows students to practice that writing skill that they're doing for their standard, but they're connecting to it in a meaningful way by thinking about a problem that actually affects them, whether it's in the school or the community as a whole, and then critically thinking about how they could solve that problem. At this point, I want to reflect on the module's description of the difference between an agent of change and a technician. Because honestly, when I first got to that part, there was a part of me that kind of argued with it a little bit. So I want to go with the example of a teacher teaching a required novel to their class, and that being a technician, because the students are disconnected from the novel, they don't like it, they think it's boring, but because it's mandatory curriculum, the teacher still teaches it. That right there was said to be a technician. And my first thought was the fact that if that was for a technician, then we're all technicians because we have to teach what the district wants us to teach. But then as I looked a little bit further into it, it went and said that if you wanted to be an agent of change, what you would have done is find supplemental materials to make that novel more engaging, or to have students be able to connect to that novel in a way that they weren't able to before. And that to me made a lot of sense. So it's not so much that you have to choose a curriculum that fits your students. It's how do you modify that curriculum? How do you take that content and make it relevant? What methods are you going to use to make it relevant? What materials, what resources are you going to use to make it relevant? So that was one of the ones that I at first had a little bit of difficulty on, just because my first instinct at that point was I have to teach it because the district mandates it. But then when I read further on, it made more sense. So the last section I really want to talk about is one of the most important ways to be culturally responsive is through relationships. When I first started teaching, I went to a CTA conference, and the union president at the time had a saying that really stuck with me and has stuck with me ever since. And this is now 3 years later. It's all about relationships. And it really is all about relationships. The relationships you have with your students, the relationships you have with your colleagues, the relationships you have with the families and with the community. I mean, I teach at a very small school, and the families talk. So, having a good relationship with families ensures like that I at least start on the right foot the next year with the next set of families. We can be culturally responsive in our relationships, and we can do this through different ways. The module suggests we operate with empathy. So that means we need to understand and share our students' concerns. You have to really give that you understand, and not just like that, oh, good, and then please go do your assignment. You have to be able to have the students and the families feel like they can come to you, and you really empathize with their position, their struggles, their hopes, their worries. One of the things I really like to do, oh, the second one is connect with families. And one of the ways I really like to do that is through home visits. I'm pretty lucky that my school is a home visit site. So we are encouraged to do home visits at the beginning and end of the year. And that allows us to really sit down with the families and say, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? What are things that they love? And it's outside of the school setting. So it doesn't have that academic pressure that sometimes is there when you're in a parent teacher conference. It's a much more laid back conversation. And then being able to use that information to help that student. And the last way that the module suggested was demonstrate authentic caring. I kind of feel like that goes right with operating with empathy. If you are operating with empathy, you are demonstrating authentic caring. Um, so I really do see how it's so important that we understand and we are able to share our students' concerns and hopes, so we can really connect with those students. I would like to end this presentation by talking about the partnership between home, school, and community. At the end of the day, we usually only have students for a year. Unless you work in high school, then you might have them for 4 years, but you're likely only having them for 1 or 2 periods a day. Impact that we have on students' lives is important, but the impact that their families and communities have on their lives is for a much longer time. I know that I covered a lot of about how that partnership between homeschool and relationships are in the relationship section of this presentation, but I really think it's important, so that's why I wanted to cover it again at the ending, um, because there is a lot of research that shows that when you engage with families and they have a good relationship with you, they're going to be more willing to partner with you to help that student succeed. If you reach to your families and you're just reaching out with negative information, they're going to avoid you. I was that teacher my very first year in the classroom. I had a few parents that I hate to admit it now would see me coming and would just try to get away before I got there. And that was because when I came to you, I normally have a problem. But I have the last 2 years since I've been doing PBIS, I've been trying to make a point to tell them, "Your student had a great day today." So now when I go and say, "Your student had a really rough day today, this happened," it's not so bad because they know that you're not this isn't the everyday. There's a lot of positive. Just sometimes there's a little rough edges we have to get out. And they'll feel more comfortable coming and telling you, my child didn't sleep well last night. This is going on at home and it's affecting them. And it knowing that I am a place that they can reach out to for resources can do nothing but support my students because the more I know about my students, the more I can help them succeed and realize their potential because that growth mindset isn't just from the classroom, it's from home. And when you have those partnerships, then you're able to help or get them resources they need. Um, I think about a activity that I do at the beginning of every school year with the rest of my staff. We fill out a paper that is labeled youth, home, work. And then there's categories like conversations or what is loud and just going through what one looked like or respect what it looked like when we were younger. So you might have one person saying respect has to be earned, another person says all adults deserve respect. And then at school they might have a different mentality, and then at home, they might have a different mentality now that they're adults. And just that diversity, from us as a staff is always really eye-opening to me because it reminds me that what I see as respectful may not be respectful to another person, and knowing more about a student's cultural background and the community that they're in as a whole helps me know more about them and helps me reach out to them and support them. Um, so I am very thankful that you stayed with me through this very long presentation, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. Thank you.